What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another Procreate tutorial where today I'm going to show you how you can create this church sunset design. Now, as always, there's links to all of the requirements for today's design over on my Patreon. They're completely free, and that's where you'll find the canvas size, you'll find the palette, and everything else that you may or may not need for today's design. Now, as always, when you're done with today's design, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them. And if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on my Patreon, where I post 3 exclusive tutorials to my Patreon supporters every single month. And the catalogue's nearly over 100 and nearly 120 Patreon exclusive tutorials. And you get access to every single one of them for as little as $4. And then you can cancel anytime you want. You can even see every single design that I've created over on my website, where you can see all of the tutorial designs before you join. And with all that said, let's get started. So once you've created a canvas, the first thing I want to do is go up to our actions and go to the option of canvas and drawing guide. We're going to turn that on. We're going to edit the drawing guide, and we're going to set it to 1/4 of the canvas size, which is 500, and hit done. Now, because we're going to use the symmetry tool later, we won't be able to use this drawing guide at the same time. So very quickly, we're just going to go to the layer, tap on it, and add the drawing assist to it. So it's going to utilize the grid system. If we just go to our brush, let's just go ahead and use something very simple like calligraphy, the monoline brush, set the size to say 4 or 5%, whatever. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, and a dark color for now. And all you need to do then is just run your pen down the grid. So you should be able to do this fairly easily because, of course, the drawing assist is in play. You can't draw wiggly lines. You can't do anything like that. So we're just going to create our own grid so that when we switch later on to the symmetry tool, we still have the grid in play, and then we'll be able to sort of lay out our design and match up to each other. And of course, we can tap on this layer and we can always set it down to, say, the 10% range or something even lower than that. So you can see it on screen, but you don't necessarily need to see it in terms of taking over the whole screen. So we'll just leave that for later. We'll create a new layer, we'll drag it underneath our grid, and let's get started with our background. So we're going to use a soft airbrush. So we're going to go to our brush, airbrushing, and the soft brush. The opacity is maxed out, but the size probably maybe around about 20, if not slightly larger. We're going to go to our colors, and in the palette, we've got this beautiful set of colors for our sky. We've got the dark blue. We'll drag that onto the screen to start with. We'll then go to our colors and grab the middle blue in the far right column. And then we'll start at the bottom. I'm going to make it a little bit larger just to start with, maybe up to about 28%. Pressing really firm currently just to get a really nice big block of color. And then I want to go up towards the middle of the top row and kind of just blend out a little bit of that light blue into the dark blue with a bit of a curve maybe in the middle. And a little something over to the right. Then we'll switch the color. We'll grab the bottom color in the far right column. We're going to introduce some purple tones, and they're going to want to be, again, fairly firm. And then as we start to make our way up into the second row here, we're going to leave a little bit of that blue, but fade in the purple tone here. So I'm just going to go left to right, just trying to make sure that I just blend out over the top of that light blue. But you want to try and leave space for, obviously, the previous color to exist. Let's go to our colors and grab the bottom of the second column from the right. And we'll blend this one in. Press really firm, and we'll blend it into around about sort of the middle point here. You can see my brush head. If you also want to see that, you can go up to your actions and go to the option of preferences, and you can turn on brush cursor. That way you'll see the circle of your brush head like I have, and then you can nicely just make the decision based on that sort of rounded shape. We'll go to our colors. We'll grab the middle color in the second column from the right. We'll introduce some lovely orange tones. Look how bright these are now. Now you want to try and start to blend these all out. Again, leaving a little bit of an existence of the previous color. You don't have to leave the whole of the previous color. You can see I've got rid of quite a lot of the sort of purpley tone there. And maybe even a little circular sort of spread in the middle to raise it up a bit more. And then we'll go to our colors and we'll grab the top of the second column. And we'll go ahead and blend in this brighter orange in here, like so. And then we'll go to our yellow tone, which is the top of the third column from the right. A nice bright yellow tone towards the middle. Circular motion, as you can see now, with a little bit of a sort of a spread on either side. So we want a little bit of that color. And then we're going to grab our colors and grab this red tone. It's the bottom of that third column from the right. And we just want to kind of just go along the horizon, what will be the horizon, and blend it up on the sides a little bit like so. So you end up with this central kind of glow. Now let's go ahead and create a new layer. Let's go to our colors and grab the top of the first column in the palette and go to your selection tool. Make sure you're using rectangle and make sure color fill. We want to tap on it until it turns blue, And then we just want to draw out a rectangle for the ground down here. And you could probably make that a tiny bit higher, just the tiniest bit, and tap on your selection tool when you're done. That's going to be our ground. Now we've done the ground here because I also want to make sure that you don't sort of add too much content too low. Let's smudge this area together now. Let's go to our smudge tool. If we tap on the smudge tool, I want to use the option of the evolve brush. So we're going to go to the option of drawing and evolve. I've got maximum opacity and I've got a brush size set to about 9%. And we want to start curving some of these lines in here, smudging. Now we want to make sure we're on the sky layer. So let's go down to the sky layer here. And then we're going to go ahead and just smudge side to side. Now you may need to zoom in. You may also want to make your brush a bit bigger. As you smudge, you're going to very lightly start to move some of these clouds sort of up and into the color above. And I want you to, again, sort of practice this little bit of a curve, a little bit of a swooping nature to the whole sky. And you can go ahead, for example, and be really bold and say, push up some color here and then start to smudge that across. So pushing up some red tone there for you to then make your way into and start smudging out with some lovely curved effects. Of course, then you can smudge the blue straight back through that and break that down. So sometimes just being a bit rogue and chucking some color a little bit higher or lower, for example, smudging the black down, or the dark blue, should I say, down, just gives me a little bit of color now from that little area of the gradient above to play with. And now I can continue smudging all the way down, bringing in some of these beautiful bright oranges further up the sky. You can see I'm kind of zigzagging a little bit, smudging upwards, trying to create that bit of a curve in the middle. Your sky should have this lovely amount of color happening. You can press again really firm if you want to. You can press really firm in, say, the orange section here and just start really chucking in the color. You know, push up some of the yellow tone here as well. You know, don't be afraid to really push that in and start creating streaks. Your streaks don't always have to go all the way to the edge either. And your kind of design will sort of start to look a bit sort of symmetrical in a sense of the lines are all going to have like a sort of gap between them that's going to look really kind of line after line after line. But as you start to smudge and make your way further up the screen, pushing the color up, you'll start to break down all that repetition, all those kind of parallel lines to one another. And eventually you'll end up with this beautiful streaky sky. And just keep pushing up those colors. And then if you sort of push up a yellow, for example, like up like this, you then just need to make sure you run your pen through it and break it down, breaking down that kind of shape that goes against the rest of the sky, and then making your way through it. As you get a little bit lower down, try not to sort of create the angles too high. You can make these curves on the end quite flicked upwards like this. But as you start to make your way further down, you can have a little bit of a sort of more horizontal sort of stroke smudge line through here. And just keep making your way through. You'll break down some of the yellows, you'll break down some of the orange tones. And in the distance, you could probably just do the odd little sort of horizontal streak almost with a very light amount of pressure. So you end up with a really thin line. You don't want anything too crazy too far back because that's just background content back there. And of course we can push up a little bit more color. And if you think you're being a bit too safe, just do this, just do that. And then just streak your way through it, really break it down, have fun with it. Try and be a bit rogue at times with your color. And all you're doing is just pushing up the lighting from a lower section, you know, push up these purples up into the blues. I almost got to a point now where I was fairly happy with it and I could have left it, but I want to sort of experiment by adding in some additional color a little bit higher. Also, what that does is that also gives some of your streaks through here multiple tone and variation. You're pushing up the purple into the blues and across the oranges as well. And then some of your cloud lines here start to have multiple tones in them, you know, a bit of yellow, a little bit of orange, a little bit of the purple tone in there. Just creating lots and lots of curves with the evolve brush, just sort of stroking that through. I'm going to try and be a bit more rogue on this side up here, pushing up some yellow up the sky. And then you can do multiple on the same side as well, like, you know, have some area of breakdown in that sky. So you'll get to the point where you start to look at it and you're quite happy with it. I'm getting very close to that point because now we've got some lovely color just all the way through each tier of the sky. Even though we've got purples and we've got blues in there, you know, you could even bring some of the dark blue down and into the scene a bit more, you know, we've got lots of tone just layering up this beautiful sunset sky. And some of it will be background content anyway, you might not even be able to see it. So we don't need to sort of stress too much. We want this kind of beautiful painting kind of look to it. Now, once you're happy with it, we can then move on to adding in some accents of clouds in here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors and grab the yellow. It's the top of the third column from the right. Our brush then wants to change to the option of textures and Dove Lake. I always love this brush for cloud work. And then we're going to go back to the layer. We're going to change its blend mode from normal to the option of add. And then I've got the size currently set to about 2%. That's going to be some really distant clouds. Now what I want you to do is I want you to try and find a line of sort that you've got here and just wiggle your pen through. Now with the distant ones, you want them to be thin lines, quite gappy, lots of gap in between them. Don't drag them out too much, and you don't even have to do too many of them either. Just a couple of little sort of scrapes in the distance in your sky. Of course, your church is going to be in the middle, so you don't need to worry about that too much. The only thing you want to do is as you start to make your way a bit higher, you want to start to make that a little bit bigger and a bit chunkier, a bit more sort of size to it. But also we want to increase the brush size in a minute as well to give us a nice large amount of area to play with, because we're going to smudge this Dove Lake in a moment. So for the sort of most part of the minute, we're just accenting some of the underside of some of the clouds, just a few lines here and there. And we can make the brush size a bit bigger. We can go up to about 3 or 4% as we make our way further up the sky. You're looking for some of your cloud-like shapes up there, and you don't have to do a lot. You really just, you can keep it fairly simple. A couple of very light sort of smudges of color here and there will look great. And let's set the brush size a bit bigger again, up to about 5% as we make our way even higher. A couple of the underside of some of those clouds a little bit higher. Lovely. You can be a bit bold with the color, because then what we'll do is we'll go to our smudge tool. We'll tap on our smudge tool. We're going to go to the option of airbrushing, and we're going to use the soft brush. And I'm going to set the size to around about sort of 2%, I think. And we're going to zoom in and we're going to start to really fade out some of these. So what you want to do is you want to smudge out the top area of any sort of area of the Dove Lake that you entered onto the sky. So I'm just smudging that out in a circular motion, and then I want to sort of make the decision, do I leave the bottom edge nice and crispy, i.e. with this kind of texture to it, or do I push a little bit closer towards it and smudge it out? Now, truth be told, that is a decision that really doesn't matter that much. You can make the decision at will and decide what you want to leave. Of course, if you smudge every part of this kind of Dove Lake area, you're going to lose a lot of the brightness. So again, that's another decision. Do you want to smudge it out, soften up the bottom edge of that cloud just a little bit, then leave a couple of areas with some nice crispy details like that, so you've got a bit of variety? Do you also want to smudge down? So for example, you can grab the brush at 3% and push down. Look at how I've just kind of erased that basically. I'm just smudging it down just towards the underside of the cloud, saying, hey, that's where the brightness is, because the sun is brightening that up in the distance, and it's just lighting up the underside of those clouds. You can smudge them out quite a bit, and I love this effect. I love lighting up the underside. Look at that. That's the effect we want to go for pretty much throughout the whole of it. So you can find another area that you've done. And again, circular motions initially just to smudge it out, blend it together, create a big swirl in it, and then you'll be able to see how some of that brightness makes its way up and brightens up your sky. And then you can go along the underside and create gaps in between as well. You don't have to keep it as a solid line. You can push really far down as well and get just the underside of some of the clouds. And again, if you've got a nice dark tone in behind like that, it will look great. And you can also push up from the bottom. You can smudge right up, but you will lose a little bit more color. So again, this is all just practice really. Smudging in different directions, but the goal is always to smudge sort of from the top, blending it out onto the cloud, and then deciding what you want to keep nice and crispy. And I say crispy because it just leaves it as it was. It leaves it with some actual kind of sharp details almost, but the underside will look lovely. These ones in the distance, I'd probably urge you just to smudge them and sort of leave the underside quite sharp, because we don't have a lot of space to play with. So I'm smudging the top end of them. Some of them might not survive very much of this kind of smudging process, and that's fine. You can also smudge them out on the ends as well. You can literally just go push that along your sky, light up the underside, and the underside of all of those now are done to a degree. Now let's go ahead and make our way into this one here too. Maybe a 3%. The brush size is solely dependent on how much cloud you added. So don't worry if your brush size doesn't match mine. That's not critical at all. It's just I'm trying to find a brush size that kind of matches up to the space I've got here and the cloud that I need to try and just light up the underside of. Now I'm just going to smudge out a few more of these before we move on. So just giving them a light little smudge like so. You can always add more later on. I urge you to probably do that as well if you get the time to do so. But for the minute, we're going to leave it because we need to get our church in first. We don't want to add in content that we're ultimately potentially going to lose. Now, before we add the church, let's add in some sort of distant trees in the background. So we're going to go ahead and create a new layer. So it's going to sit underneath this black bar at the bottom. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab this color here. It's the middle of the first column. We want to make sure our brush is set back to the option of drawing and evolve. I want to set the opacity to 65% and I want the size around about 10. We're just going to simply draw in some trees that have a bit of a diagonal nature. They're going to push down towards the center where they're ultimately going to vanish. Now, don't forget you are at 65%. So try and do one large brush stroke all the way down towards the bottom and set yourself a bit of a vague shape like this. Lots of jitters in there. You can even go slightly higher on the ends if you want, just to create some pointing and direction in towards the center point of your design. And then go back over it. Look at that. I've not changed the color, but the very bottom edge now has got a bit of a darker spot to it. I can wiggle my pen through here. And then making sure that the bottom of here is darker than the top edge. We want the top edge to have a little bit more of that red tone that the color provides, and the bottom area just to blend into the darkness of the kind of silhouette. And you can go ahead and just add in very lightly with your brush some quite nice little speckles in here, which will just add in some like tree-like shapes. You can even purposely add in something, you know, a little bit larger, a little bit more rounded, rather than the kind of diagonal line only. You know, you could do something over here just to add in a bit more character to the sky. Lovely. Now, once you're done with that, I urge you to potentially even blur it out as well. So tap on your adjustments and go to Gaussian blur, and then swipe from left to right. And all you want to do, when you swipe from left to right, the percentage there increases at the top. We only need a really small amount of blur here. You don't want to do anything like that. I think something around about 2% does the trick. It just fades it out enough. We can tap on our adjustments when we're done. Now let's go ahead and draw in our church. So what we want to do is we want to go to our layers. I want to make sure that you've got your grid at the top and you tap on it and maybe just increase it up a tiny bit in opacity to say like 12%. Now we want to create a new layer and we want to drag it underneath the grid and underneath that black bar at the bottom of our screen. Now we then want to go ahead and change the drawing assist as well. So first of all, let's just triple check. We tap on this layer and we add the drawing assist to it, because we want to utilize the symmetry tool. We want to see this word here that says assisted underneath. If we go up to our actions and we go to canvas, we want to edit the drawing guide and we want to change it to the option of symmetry. We want to change the option to vertical and then hit done in the top right when you're done. So now you've essentially got two drawing guides on the screen at the same time. You can see what I do on one side is reflected on the other. So let's go ahead and draw in our church. And you can do this multiple ways. You can start at the bottom, you can start at the top. It's totally up to you. I'm going to start at the bottom and I'm going to start with a straight line. Now, what brush am I using? We need to go to our brush. We're going to go to inking. We're going to use the technical pen and we're going to go ahead and set the size initially to about 34%. I'm going to go ahead and draw in a straight line down and then pop a finger on the screen to make sure it's nice and straight and then link up these two lines at the bottom. You can see my grid. You should be able to lay out accordingly and match up towards that a little bit. I'm then going to start over here and then make my way across and make my way in towards this kind of point roughly around about here. And you can see if you press really lightly, you get a nice thin taper. And then if you press quite firm, you get a large blob. So for example, you can start off light and then heavy, just a little bit like I did there. A nice thin point, which is a taper, into like a blocky end there. Let's go ahead then and draw in a straight line. Let's draw in a straight line up here, pop a finger on the screen. I'll go ahead and just draw that in slightly. So I'm just going to start off a little bit lighter. You can always bring your size down if you need to of your brush. And it's up to you if you want to leave like little bumps and lumps like this. Maybe it'll add more character. We'll see. We'll go ahead and we'll draw in another line up. So I just want to zoom out so you can see the whole of this grid. And I'm going to go ahead and go down from roughly around about say here. I want that thin taper at the top, and then I want to go ahead and just again do that, but pointing inwards. Now you can point inwards a little further than you need to. Let's go ahead then and draw in another line that's going to come up here. And it doesn't need to be straight necessarily. You could have it pointed inwards. I'm then going to kind of create like a bit of a point here in this area here. So a little bit of a point. Lovely. And then from there, we've pretty much got the basic shape that we can go all the way to the top now. So you could really create whatever kind of church you want all the way up to the top and make sure your lines link up nicely all the way up there. So that's your general silhouette. You can drag and drop the color into that space so you can see the whole silhouette. That's really helpful because then you can go ahead and see if you want to identify certain areas and just make adjustments to it. At the very top here, you don't have to do the cross if that's not your vibe. I'm going to bring the brush size down to about 14%. I'm just going to create like a thin point at the top and then a little bit of a very tiny cross at the top. You can do whatever you like up there, any sort of decorative sort of styling you like. I can then take a look at the rest of the silhouette now and see if I can make any other adjustments. I really like this block that sticks out here, almost like a castle style design. So could I go ahead and just create like a bit of a point there, another block outwards, and then maybe even thicken that line up a bit more down, and then just fill in any other little gaps that I can see. Here, could I go ahead and create any additional details here, maybe some sort of blocks almost. I don't want to make it look too much like a castle, but I do like the kind of architecture that does tend to provide. And then I'm just going to go ahead and just make this point a little bit thicker if I can. So I'm just going to go ahead and try and just point this kind of roof part and make it a little bit wider like so. Now that color actually needs to match the very bottom color. So we're going to go to our colors and just grab the top of the first column and just drag it into that space. It will look slightly darker, that's all. Now, at this point, you want to be happy with your church. What we then want to do is also create a mask on this. So we're going to tap on it and add a mask to it. So we're going to tap on the option of mask. It will also be drawing assisted. Now go to your color and just double tap at the bottom of the disc to select black. And let's just go back to our layer and triple check you're not on this part, you're on this part of the actual mask. And then from there, you can go ahead and make sure you're on the mask. We're going to zoom in. And then at any point, just roughly around about, say, down here, you want to go ahead and create like a bit of a diagonal kind of pitched roof. So you can just link them up into the middle like so. And then from there, we can go ahead and create a lovely window design. So we can draw in a straight line up. And I want to triple check my sizing. I think that's about right. And then I'll just curve that over at the top. Some of these are very, very tiny details, so you don't need to sort of make sure your curves are super perfect or anything like that. And then just go ahead and drag and drop black into that space. Zoom out, that's your window. That's what we're going to leave as a nice gap in between. Now, you might want to adjust that. So if you want to draw a mask back in, you just double tap to select white. And then you can go ahead and maybe sort of create a curve like I've just done, and then sharpen up the point of that window a bit more like so. Now, you also now need to make sure that your color is set to white. So double tap in the top left of the disc. And now we can draw in a really nice pattern in the middle of your window. So if we go ahead and we take a look, we're going to draw up a central column here. And we're going to draw that up to around about, say, here. And then we'll create a curve outwards from that point. And you can create whatever beautiful design of a window you like. I'll create a horizontal line. Let's make sure it's nice and straight. So I'll pop my finger on the screen. And then from there, we can go ahead and maybe create like a vertical line coming down here as well. And then we could create two curves like this and another one like that. We could also go ahead and make sure that that goes all the way to the very top. And then in this little sort of gap here, you may want to carry on these vertical lines all the way down and potentially introduce any other kind of details. I'm really happy with how that window looks. We've got a lovely amount of sort of detail in there. Potentially you might want to thicken up some of those lines. So maybe you could thicken up the center point if you wanted to, just to make sure it's got some good solid nature to it. And then maybe even these lines here, I could thicken them up as well. Let's introduce another window. So we'll just repeat the same principles. Black hides and white reveals. So make sure you're on your disk. You double tap at the bottom of the disk when you want to start a new element. We'll just create a really small window at the top here. So we'll just draw in another horizontal line, which gives us sort of the bottom point of our little window. You can draw in a straight line up and then two curves in towards the middle. You can do it as a point, or you can purposely create like a bit of an exaggerated arc. Hold your pen down and then you can just adjust that arc freely like so. And because we're hiding, we can drag and drop the black in. We can switch our color back to white, so double tap in the top left, and draw in your next window. So you could, again, draw in a similar kind of style. Draw it up to a central point, create a curve outwards, create a horizontal line out like that. And I might even just put like another horizontal line in here and then be done with that kind of window. I'm going to make sure it's nice and horizontal though, so I'll pop one finger on the screen. And because it's quite a small window, you don't want to over detail it. And we're going to go ahead and draw in one more. So we're going to go back to our colors, double tap at the bottom of the disk to select black. And then we're going to tap away. And we're just going to create a really small window at the top here, just a tiny sort of triangular shape here. That's all I want to introduce. So we've got 3 in total, top to bottom. Let's then add some color to the actual church itself. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to utilize the sky that we've already done and swipe it to the left and duplicate it. We're going to go ahead and drag it above our church. We're going to tap on it. We're going to clipping mask it to the church, and then we're going to hide all of it. Now, I know that sounds a bit silly, but we'll tap on it. We'll add a mask, and then the mask that's been added, we simply tap on it and invert it. Now, a mask hides if it's black. If it's white, it reveals. So because we've made the mask now all black, all of that sky that's clipped to the church is not showing. However, if we tap on the layer for the sky and we tap on it and add the drawing assist as well, so it's going to use the symmetry option now. If you go to the mask, change your color to white by double tapping in the top left, and then go to your brush, go to airbrushing and the soft brush and set that size to around about say 5 or 6%. All I want you to do is zoom in, and don't forget symmetry is in play. You can go down the very edge here. You're in white, which means you're revealing, remember, and you can go ahead and reveal that sun just making its way around the edge of some of the building. So you're drawing it back in, basically. You're showing us that there's a little bit of light just bleeding around the edge of the actual church itself. And then you can do it a couple of times if you want to. Don't overdo this though, it's really easily done, but you just want to show a little bit of that light wrapping round. Now let's go ahead and focus on our row of trees before we carry on with any other elements. So let's go to our layers. We'll go right to the top of our layers and we'll create a new layer, and then we'll drag it underneath our grid, just so that our grid's always at the top. We want to go ahead and go to our colors and grab the first color in the palette, top left. And I'm going to change my brush. I'm going to go into the option of inking, and I'm going to use the syrup brush. It's my favorite for creating trees. And I've got the size set to about 9% just to start with. We are going to draw in our tree. Now I'm going to use this line here as a guide almost, and just to the right of it as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just go up here, and I want to create a tree that's going to go right to the top of our canvas, but we do not want to go off the top of our canvas. So I'm using this now as a guide. This is going to be my kind of tree trunk. I'm going to press really firm because the syrup brush is pressure sensitive. And I'm going to go all the way to the bottom towards the ground and just make sure I fill that in. That's my tree trunk. I can now start to work off of that and create branches. And I really want you to sort of just use the pressure sensitivity and just go to town creating branches and branches and branches, wiggly branches, really, really thin. The only thing that matters is your pressure sensitivity. You want to obviously make sure that the branch is slightly thicker as it sort of leaves the main body of the actual tree, and then you can create really, really thin lines all the way off from all of these branches. Make them overlap. They look fantastic when they do. It just builds up that real realistic approach. And then let go of that one, create a whole new branch, bulk it into the tree itself, and again, go to town on creating some lovely sort of really woven, intertwined branches just in between each other. Create a thick branch off of there as well. You don't have to have one avenue. You can have multiple avenues off of the same sort of initial branch, and then create all of these branches just running over the top of each other. Try and make sure then that you occasionally think about chunking it up a little bit. And this central column's not done with, it's just what we started with essentially. So we can go ahead and create a branch, say runs out from here. And then I'm immediately going to go ahead and create one that's fairly close to it. And then I'll do another one up here. And it's quite random sometimes with these branches. You don't have to have a set route in mind or anything for them in any way at all. You can just keep creating lots of avenues, and then you can start to think about maybe making your brush either smaller or just tackling your pressure sensitivity. You know, I could make it smaller and really speed up the process of just creating all of these little branches, little twigs off from the end. And I want them all to intertwine. And then One thing I urge you to also do is just do some of these ones where you just let the branch go all over the place. So that was quite hard to see. For example, here, let these branches just wiggle like this all over the place. These really thin ones that just wiggle all over the place. Lots of different avenues, really chaotic almost with your sort of angles and your jitters. We want all of these brushes. We want all of the brush sensitivity of actually all of our tremors to be applied to this. So we want it to wander all over, all the way through, intertwine, and just let all those thin areas take over. That may take a little bit of time for you just to fill this in. Now, while I've got you for a moment, there's also our weekly show. And I say our weekly show. Well, me and James Julia have a weekly show here on YouTube. It's the Sketchwave if you're new to it. It's a weekly show where we talk all things Procreate, digital art, a little bit about us as well in between. And we hope that you're enjoying it if you are already a regular watcher. But if you're not, you can check it out on YouTube at the Sketchwave. And we're available every single week. Again, me and James Julia get together and just discuss a topic. So you can also submit questions to the show as well if you'd like us to tackle anything that you've got a burning desire to be answered. And each week we also go through our tutorials. So we also break down our tutorials, take a look through what we've created and see how it came about, what the thought processes were involved. Now I'm going to bring the brush size down to about 3 or 4% because I think I can press it a bit firmer now and create some interesting avenues for all of these branches. But I'll leave a link to the Sketchwave in the description down below, or you can just search the Sketchwave on YouTube and we will be there. So let's keep going. Now we want to only go as high as the edge of the canvas because I'm only going to make you draw this tree once. We're going to try our best to just duplicate it, save ourselves some time. You don't want to keep drawing all these trees multiple times. And to a degree, sometimes you can get away with that. Sometimes you can't though. Sometimes you can't, sometimes you do have to draw them in. So it's dependent on what you think you see when you see your design. Do you think that there's too much repetition? Can you easily spot the repetition of the branches and the tree and every element that goes involved? So that's something for you to tackle potentially. Let's go ahead and just chunk up my central column of my tree a little bit more. I don't want it to be too crazy or too angular, but I do want it to have a nice chunk in the middle and then get a little bit thinner, of course, towards the top. Leave gaps in your tree branches. Don't have them sort of all connected too much. Of course, at the very top here where they're all fighting for sunlight, you can go ahead and do loads of those little tiny wiggly branches that we spoke about. But leave gaps here where these ones are, you know, previous shoots that were either cut potentially or trimmed back and they never made it right to the very top or had a chance to go all the way to the very top anyway. I'm just going to introduce a couple more here and then maybe a small little shoot off of there, a couple of really wiggly tremor-like ones in there. Let's keep going, a couple more off of there, and we should be done with our tree. Now, we're going to use this tree multiple times now to duplicate and create the avenue down towards the church. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the layer multiple times, and I'm only going to do one side and then simply just reflect it. So I'm going to turn off that layer. I'm going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. The top one out the two, I'll turn it on. I'll grab my cursor. I'm going to go ahead and use the uniform option and probably scale this one up in size. I'm going to move it until it's way over here on the edge of my canvas and it's up here towards the top left of our design. I'll tap on my cursor when I'm done. We're then going to go to our layers. We're going to go down to the one that we turned off and we're going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. It is our stamp essentially. I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to grab that second one. I'm going to grab my cursor. I'm going to flip it horizontally to start with and I'm going to use uniform and scale it down in size. Now it only wants to be just a little bit higher than the midway point. We're already getting quite small with these. You can then use the option of, say, warp, for example. Don't do anything crazy, but you could use the option of warp here just to create a slightly different aesthetic to the tree, maybe even just crunch it in a bit more. I don't think you're going to see too much repetition, but just in case. And then tap on your cursor when you're done. So I've just moved it around a little bit. And then we're going to go ahead and go back down to the one that we've got turned off, swipe it to the left and duplicate it. Grab your cursor. Now this layer is currently not showing, so I need to go back and turn it on. Grab my cursor, use uniform again, so tap on uniform and scale it down in size. We're going to move it down to around about sort of the midway point of this row here. and the gap's now going to get really, really small between these trees. In fact, I'm going to move this tree here onto the first sort of column there, edge, and I'm going to go back and move the other one across. So I'm going to grab my cursor and just move that one across the tiniest little bit over towards here. They don't need to be evenly gapped, but something like that. Then go to your layers. We'll go to the one that's turned off and swipe it to the left and duplicate it. We want 5 on this left hand side, so we swipe it to the left, we duplicate it, we turn it on, and once we turned it on, we'll grab our cursor. We will go ahead and use the uniform option and scale this right down in size. Again, use the grid for sizing. I'm scaling it right down in size, making it, of course, smaller than the previous one. I might even flip this one horizontally as well. Move it down. The gap's going to start to get quite compressed between these to a degree. So I'm going to move it down. It's just ever so slightly taller than the bottom row there. And then I'm going to go back to my layer. I'm going to turn on the one that we had originally turned off. Tap on it, grab my cursor, and I'm going to use uniform again, scale it down in size, move it all the way to the back of the design. And I'm going to push it right into this space, probably only around about up to that first row height. And obviously it's a bit smaller because it should be sat a little bit further back. And again, don't forget about your floor as well. You want it connected. Now, you shouldn't see too much repetition there, to be honest, because it's going to be a matter of perspective. Now, you potentially want to move the first one just a tiny bit across, just to continue that kind of row all the way to the back. And then when you're done, pinch all 5 of your trees into one group and one layer. Swipe that to the left and duplicate it. Grab your cursor and then flip it horizontally and move it across to the right hand side. Making sure you just touch the edge of the screen, of course, and tap on your cursor when you're done. Now, there's so much information and data in here that you might not see any repetition. This is your decision now, though. This right hand side layer, if you think there's too much repetition, get in here now and create new avenues for the tree. You know, maybe even like a whole new branch here, maybe even like a random shoot off from there, and like a couple more that fill in these gaps. You can really bulk out a few just to draw your eye into different areas of the tree. And then that way, hopefully you lose a little bit of that repetition. You could even widen this one up as well, just to make it look a little bit different to the opposite side. Now, what we're then going to do is we're going to add some foliage to this, which hopefully should also tie in the kind of disguise of the repetition. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer. And if you want to, you can pinch your 2 tree layers into one layer as well. We're going to go ahead and go to our colors and grab this color here, the middle of that first column. We're going to go to our brush. We want the organic brush and we want the snow gun. I've got the opacity set to 43% and I've currently got the size set to about 7. We want to go ahead and add in some leaves to these trees that of course get nice and small as they get further back. And this is where you can make them look slightly different to each other. So I'm going to wiggle my pen through here, and because I've got a low opacity, I can go back over myself and layer up the color. It's pressure sensitive too, so you can press really firm and get some big leaves in there, but you don't want to do too many. Just give your tree a general kind of silhouette of a few sort of leaves here and there. Don't come too far across your design. Leave gaps in between. So just wiggling my pen through here, leaving some gaps. And then because I can now decide what I want this side to look like, I could maybe make this one look completely different. Maybe this one in its maybe autumn state has sort of had all its leaves fall off already. So you can disguise the general shape of them by making them just slightly different with their foliage. And then that way you end up with quite a different sort of look to it. And because there's so much data in here in terms of in these leaves, you cannot really tell also the avenues for all of the actual leaves and the branches. So you can nicely hide it all. I'm just going to get in there, add in a few more, and I'm going to tap a few times because we want a few of those leaves to have quite a dark look to them. We don't want them all to be too nice and light, so that low percentage of opacity gets a little bit darker, a little bit heavier. I can add some in there too. And then I urge you just to leave it, get it a little bit sort of laid out, your plan, and then go down to about 5% and press really firm and just make your way further back. So you're going down the tree and behind now with a similar idea, a similar concept. Ignore the trees in behind it for a moment. You're just making your way through tree after tree, and then go to the tree and behind. If you can just about work it out, you want your brush to get really, really light. So you could even bring the size down to about 2% and just go all the way to the very back, adding in some leaf coverage here. You can wiggle your pen in there. You can literally further back, just go around in a circular motion here and just very quickly add in some leaves to those trees right at the distance. Wiggle your pen through there. And again, this is where all of those sort of shapes of the trees start to get lost now. So I'm going to go from back to front on this side because I've got my small brush size already. Starting at the very back, wiggling my pen, going through it a few times because again, I want that different level of density and also the darkness of the leaves. I'll set the size to about 3% and just continue making my way forward. And it's really simple. You don't have to sort of overthink this. You can just wiggle your pen through your leaves, let the brush do all of the work. The only thing I urge you to do is, of course, go back in and just tap a few times in certain areas, add in more color and density to those leaves and the trees. And then this one here, I can go in with a small brush size just to start with, wiggle my pen through there, and then probably press a little bit firmer to get some larger leaves so they start to get a bit bigger as they get closer towards us, of course. And here you should end up with a bit of a layering on top of each other because the trees are all layering and all their leaves and start sort of creating a big blob of leaves almost. Now at that point you can then take a look at your closest ones and do you want to wiggle in some smaller leaves in here, some different clusters, some different levels of pressure. By all means, bring the opacity up to say 64%, 65, 70, something around that range, and get back in here now and really block it out in certain areas if you think that that's what you want to do. Just a few more taps just to add in a little bit of a darker look in certain areas. And because these are a little bit closer towards us, they would get a little bit darker. So you can get away with making them a bit darker in these top areas. And for me, I don't see any repetition in the trees now because of those sort of little elements here and there. Now there's only one more final layer to make, and I want to show the sun beaming through the center here. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to create a flare. Now I want to go down to my sky again and swipe it to the left and duplicate it. I'm going to drag it now all the way to the top, but underneath my trees. So it's going to be up to here. I'm then going to go ahead and tap on it, and I'm going to add a mask. And just like we did before, I'm going to tap on it and I'm going to invert the mask to black. So all of that sky is not showing at the current point. I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to the option of add. And I want to make sure I'm on the mask. So I'm here. My color is set to the option of white in the top left. And my brush, we want to go into the option of luminance. It will be called luminance for you. And there's the flare brush right at the tippity top. The size is set to 64% and the opacity is at 100. Now I want to go ahead and tap in this space here, just in between these windows, to add in a flare. Now your pressure also makes a difference here as well. And also it's determined by how much light you've created in behind. So you may need to tap on this layer and bring its opacity down a little bit as well. So you could bring that down to say 75% and just have that beautiful bright glow. Now you may need to move that and try that a few times. Just clear your mask and then tap on it and invert it back to black. And then I'm just going to keep trying until I get it just landing just how I want it in behind the church. I want it bleeding through, all that light just blurring through. That looks lovely. And again, you can always mess with the opacity if you want to. You can tap on it, bring that down even lower. It's totally up to you. Again, this is quite dependent on this layer here that you created for the glow. So you could even tap on this layer and bring that down just to get rid of those edge glows just a tiny bit. Now I've been messing with my settings for a minute, so I've gone ahead and made my flare layer roughly around about 50% there. I could probably boost it up to 55 now seeing it. So 55% on the flare layer. And I'm also going to go down to this layer that's clipped to the church. I've got its opacity set to 64%, but I'm also going to tap on the mask here. I want to make sure my color is set to white. And I'm going to go to my brush and change it back to airbrushing in the soft brush. And then I'm very lightly, with around about 3 or 4%, I'm going to find that window and I'm just going to, probably smaller than that, 2%, and just brighten up the edge of the window. I want to show that lighting making its way through, maybe even the top window too, just to show a lot of that brightness blaring through our windows there, just to give some nice glows. And when you're done, make sure, it's really important that you turn off your grid at the very top. You can even go up to your actions and turn off your drawing guide. You can pinch with 2 fingers and go full screen with 4, and you end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. As always, if you decide to share your work with me, you can tag me on any of the social platforms, Instagram, Facebook. I'm pretty much everywhere. Make sure to subscribe for weekly Procreate tutorials, but if you want even more tutorials, you can come and join me over on Patreon, where I post 3 more exclusive tutorials to my Patreon supporters every single month I've posted well over 100 at the time of recording. It might even be around about 120 at the time of recording. And you can get access to every single one of them when you join as a patron. And it starts from as little as $4 and you can cancel anytime. You can see every single design that I've got over on my website, so you can see every single tutorial before you join. I'll leave links to all of that in the description down below. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you'll love this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.